Madam President. Madam President, over the recess that just concluded, I had a chance to visit South Africa in an Aspen Institute conference to discuss the future of that continent. With so much of the world's attention on Ukraine, as it should be, and the Middle East, as it should be, we often forget the importance of this dynamic and challenging African continent with nearly 1 out of 5 of the world's population, a percentage that will increase greatly this century. There were so many different aspects we discussed, so many different opportunities, and the thing that I came away with was the clear understanding. The Chinese understand this. They see a future in Africa that we don't see, and they're investing dramatically in Africa's future. If the United States and other Western nations ignore this reality, the Africa of tomorrow will be a lot different than the one today and may not be our friend as we want them to be. During my time in Congress, I've tried to advance several efforts to foster more engagement in Africa, including support for funding to address AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria through the Global Fund, and PEPFAR, as well as mobility programs, clean water and sanitation. In fact, Chicago-based World Bicycle Relief is helping lead some of the most innovative mobility programs that help get kids to school and healthcare workers to visit rural, remote areas. I didn't agree with President George W. Bush on many things, but I want to give him credit for making the United States a leader in stemming the HIV/AIDS pandemic in some of the poorest parts of the world, including Africa. It was just over 20 years ago. Nearly 30 million Africans were infected with HIV/AIDS, 30 million. They had almost no access to treatment. President George W. Bush's response was known as PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It worked. PEPFAR and its companion effort, the Global Fund, dramatically curtailed the AIDS epidemic ravaging many parts of the world, including much of Africa, saving more than 25 million lives. These programs provided retroviral drugs for those with AIDS, allowing them to live productive lives and prevent the spread of disease through childbirth. They have been so effective that some might have forgotten just how devastating AIDS hit many parts of the world, killing more than 2 million people globally each year and leaving 14 million orphans in sub-Saharan Africa. I was reminded on my trip just how devastating AIDS was to Southern Africa. Take Malawi, where PEPFAR and Global Fund programs have increased the number of Malawians living with AIDS on treatment from 5% to 95%. Survivors. So it is bewildering to me. I can't understand this. We're presently engaged in a political debate on Capitol Hill as to whether PEPFAR was a good program. Extremists are arguing that we shouldn't reauthorize this historic life-saving program when people are still dependent on these drugs to survive from day to day and week to week. Last year, President Bush Jr., in this situation, wrote an op-ed urging PEPFAR reauthorization in the Washington Post, in which he quoted his late speechwriter and PEPFAR champion Michael Gerson as follows: "What definition of pro-life does not include saving millions of lives from preventable disease and death?" Bush went on to note, "We're on the verge of ending the HIV/AIDS epidemic. To abandon our commitment now would forfeit 2 decades of unimaginable progress and rather further questions about the worth of America's words." I agree. I call on my Republican friends to help authorize this historic, bipartisan, life-saving effort without further delay. Madam President, on a different topic, just before our recent recess, the Senate overwhelmingly passed a bipartisan aid package, notably to help Ukraine defend itself against Russia. Ukraine has fought a heroic, historic, significant battle to defend its independence and democracy, thwarting a full-scale Russian invasion 2 years ago and showing the world how you stand up to a bully like Vladimir Putin. In fact, its resistance to Russia has major security impacts and benefits for our largest Western security. But as everyone in Congress knows, Ukraine urgently needs more weapons and assistance and needs it now. Our European allies approved their aid earlier this month. But despite European and U.S. Senate support, Many almost unbelievable events have occurred over the past few weeks that endanger Ukraine's chances of success and global security. Closest to home, the House of Representatives has remained passive, detached, silent for the past 2 weeks on the Senate-passed National Security Supplemental Bill, with its leadership subservient to Donald Trump, who in turn is just enamored, a real bromance with Vladimir Putin. Last week, true to form, former President Trump went so far as to even say he would encourage Russia to attack fellow NATO members. Can you imagine anyone responsibly making that suggestion? I can't. Furthermore, on the global stage, public reports have suggested that Putin is thinking of putting some kind of nuclear weapon in space. For all those who want to embrace Putin as part of our future, look at the reality of the situation in Ukraine and in outer space. Amidst all of this, Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny died in a Russian gulag prison just before a sham election in which Putin is afraid of any real competition. In response to this tragedy, Trump sank to a new low, shamefully comparing Navalny's death to his own self-inflicted legal problems. Is there anyone who doesn't see that Putin is gloating at this perceived impunity and relishing his congressional apologist? Why in the world would we play into Donald Trump's delusions? Why would Trump be holding Republicans fawn over Putin, a wanted war criminal responsible for kidnapping 20,000 Ukrainian children and taking them to Russia, a stunning number that is likely to go higher? Or imagine the scene shared by my colleagues from Hawaii, that of Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines checking their phones to see whether House Republicans passed our Ukrainian aid package. They were watching our votes on the floor of the United States Senate while they're risking their lives in a battle against Putin. These soldiers are fighting with their lives for democracy and security in Europe, while House Republicans do nothing. It's time for the House Republicans to pass this urgently needed aid package without further delay. Madam President, I want to show photographs of two individuals. 2 years ago, I had the privilege of meeting this man, Vladimir Kara-Murza. He is a patriot and a Russian opposition leader. What a risky business to be in. Putin twice tried to poison him, but failed. After his recovery here in the United States, he made a conscious decision that I couldn't believe. He said, I'm going back to Russia. Someone has to be willing to fight and die for freedom and democracy in that country. I said to him as he was leaving, you're going to face certain arrest and imprisonment. He said, I know it, but I've got to do it. He had to continue the fight. I'll never forget that moment of bravery and conviction in my office. Not long after his return to Russia, he was arrested for criticizing Putin's war in Ukraine. That was he showed the same kind of patriotic courage as his compatriot Alexei Navalny, who died just a few days ago at the hands of Vladimir Putin's henchmen. Putin tried to kill Navalny by poison too. He barred Navalny from running for office, from sharing stories of massive criminal corruption, and from speaking on the horrors of the Ukrainian war. Through it all, like Kara-Murza, Navalny was undeterred, and we know what happened. His tragic fate in that Arctic prison where he had been exiled. He was murdered by Vladimir Putin for fighting for freedom. Navalny, Kara-Murza, and the Ukrainians on the front lines are the brave patriots in this world. Heroes Congress should look to for inspiration and courage instead of a resort in Florida known as Mar-a-Lago. In a small but lasting tribute to Navalny's courage today, Senator Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, and I are introducing legislation to rename the street next to the residence of the Russian ambassador to the United States. The new name will be Navalny Way. This will not change what Putin has done or the unspeakable harm he's caused the Navalny family or millions of Ukrainians, including those children who've been kidnapped. But unlike the hooded Putin thugs trying to erase Navalny's memory by arresting mourners and quickly removing flowers left at makeshift memorials, this will force Russian diplomats in Washington to be reminded every day as they drive by of their crimes. I hope measure and in larger tribute to Navalny, our Ukrainian allies, and the thousands of kidnapped Ukrainian children, pass a supplemental without further delay. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.